7-year-old poor boy is kicked out for breaking a millionaire CEO's $20,000 vase. But what he said next left everyone pale. Hit the comments and tell us your city or country. Let's see how far this story reaches. The early morning sun filtered through the threadbare curtains of apartment 4B, casting a warm glow over 7-year-old Tommy Brooks as he meticulously arranged circuit boards and recycled materials on their small kitchen table. His nimble fingers worked with surprising precision for a child his age, connecting wires to a small solar panel salvaged from a discarded calculator. "Mom, I think I've got it working." Tommy's eyes sparkled with excitement as a tiny LED light flickered to life. Sarah Brooks looked up from where she was carefully mending a small navy blue suit jacket. Despite the exhaustion etched on her face, the result of working double shifts at the diner and the convenience store, her smile was genuine and filled with pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said, setting down her needle. "Tell me again how it works?" Tommy launched into an enthusiastic explanation, using terms far beyond his years. "It's a miniature renewable energy converter. See, the solar panel captures the light energy, then converts it through these circuits I modified and stores excess power in this tiny battery I rewired from an old phone." Sarah watched her son, marveling at his brilliance. Tommy had always been exceptional, reading by age 3, solving complex math problems by 5, and now building functioning renewable energy devices at 7. If only they had the resources to nurture his talents properly. "The science teacher says all the best projects will be displayed at the Grant Mansion tomorrow," Tommy continued, barely containing his excitement. "Can you believe it, Mom? The Maxwell Grant will be there." Sarah's hand stilled on the jacket. "Maxwell Grant? The CEO?" Tommy nodded vigorously, his brown curls bouncing. "His foundation is picking student projects to sponsor. Ms. Wilson says some kids might even get scholarships." He paused, his voice dropping slightly. Do you think my project is good enough?" Sarah crossed the small living room and knelt beside her son, gently turning his face toward hers. "Tommy Brooks, your mind is a gift. This project isn't just good, it's brilliant, and anyone who can't see that isn't looking hard enough." But as Tommy returned to his work, Sarah's smile faded. She glanced around their modest one-bedroom apartment, the water stains spreading on the ceiling, the mismatched furniture from second-hand stores, the pile of past-due notices she kept hidden in her dresser drawer. Ever since David had walked out when Tommy was just 2, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises, she'd been fighting an uphill battle. Tommy deserved so much better. This opportunity at the Grant Mansion could be life-changing. Later that evening, after Tommy had finally fallen asleep, Sarah carefully laid out his only good clothes for tomorrow, the navy suit that had been a splurge from the thrift store last Christmas, now slightly too small. She picked up her needle again, working by the dim light to let out the sleeves just a bit more. The invitation to the Grant Mansion event had come as a complete surprise. Tommy's school had been selected for the annual charity showcase hosted by the Grant Foundation, where Maxwell Grant himself would review student projects. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, especially for a brilliant child from the poorest district in the city. As Sarah stitched carefully, her thoughts drifted to the story she'd read about Maxwell Grant, the self-made billionaire who had transformed a small tech startup into Grant Enterprises, one of the largest innovation companies in the country. His face was on business magazines, his name on buildings. To most people in their neighborhood, he existed in another universe entirely. Yet, tomorrow her little boy would be standing in the man's mansion, showing his homemade renewable energy project. "Perfect," Sarah whispered, holding up the jacket. It wasn't new, but it was clean and presentable. Tommy would look so handsome. She placed the suit carefully over the back of their only chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights. In the distance, somewhere out there stood Grant Mansion on the hill overlooking the city, a world away from their reality. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, "just give him a chance to shine." In his small bed in the corner of the room, Tommy clutched his renewable energy prototype to his chest, too excited to fully sleep, dreaming of tomorrow and the moment when Maxwell Grant would see his creation and recognize what Sarah had always known, that this small boy from apartment 4B was destined for greatness. The school bus rumbled along the winding road, climbing steadily toward the affluent hillside neighborhood where Grant Mansion stood. Tommy pressed his face against the cool window glass, watching as modest houses gave way to sprawling estates behind ornate gates. "Do you think he'll actually talk to us?" whispered Ellie, Tommy's classmate from across the aisle. Tommy clutched, his renewable energy project protectively in his lap. "Ms. Wilson said he picks the best projects himself." His heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This morning, when his mother had helped him put on his carefully mended suit, she'd looked at him with such pride that it made his chest ache. "You look so handsome," she'd said, smoothing his unruly curls. "Just like your father when I first met him." It was rare for her to mention his father. Tommy knew only that he'd left when Tommy was 2, vanished without explanation, leaving them to fend for themselves. As the bus rounded a corner, Tommy's thoughts drifted to last night when he'd caught his mother asleep at the kitchen table, still clutching her sewing needle, dark circles under her eyes. He'd carefully draped a blanket over her shoulders before returning to bed. She worked so hard, at the diner from dawn until mid-afternoon, then at the convenience store until late evening. Some nights she took online classes, dreaming of becoming a nurse someday. "I'm going to help her," Tommy whispered to himself, tightening his grip on his project. "If Mr. Grant picks my invention, everything will change." His daydream unfurled like a movie. Maxwell Grant, impressed by Tommy's ingenuity, offering a generous grant. Tommy using the money to move his mother into a better apartment, somewhere she wouldn't have to work 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Perhaps she could even finish her nursing classes. "Look!" someone shouted, jolting Tommy from his reverie. There it is. The bus had turned onto a private drive flanked by perfectly manicured hedges. At the end of the long driveway stood Grant Mansion, a modern architectural marvel of glass, stone, and steel that seemed to rise organically from the hillside. Massive windows reflected the morning sunlight, giving the impression that the entire structure was glowing. Tommy's mouth fell open. He'd seen pictures of the mansion in magazines, but nothing compared to seeing it in person. It was larger than his entire apartment building. "Remember, children," Ms. Wilson called from the front of the bus, her voice tight with nervous excitement. "Best behavior today. This is a tremendous opportunity for our school." As the bus pulled to a stop in the circular driveway, Tommy noticed several sleek cars already parked nearby. Other schools had arrived before them. "Come on," Ellie nudged him as students began filing off the bus. Tommy stood, suddenly aware of his 2 short pant legs and the small scuff on his left shoe that wouldn't polish away. His stomach tightened with anxiety. "You okay?" asked Ms. Wilson. Noticing his hesitation, Tommy nodded, swallowing hard. "Just nervous." She smiled kindly. "Your project is remarkable, Tommy. Be proud of what you've accomplished with so few resources. That's what makes it special." With those words bolstering his courage, Tommy stepped off the bus, his precious invention cradled carefully in his arms. The crisp morning air carried the scent of expensive flowers and freshly cut grass. Ahead, the massive front doors of Grant Mansion stood open, revealing glimpses of the opulence within. Tommy took a deep breath, thinking of his mother's tired smile and unwavering belief in him. "This is for you, Mom," he whispered, and with renewed determination he followed his classmates toward the entrance of the grand estate, unaware that this day would change the course of his life forever, though not in the way he imagined. The grand foyer of Grant Mansion stole Tommy's breath away. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, dancing across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A massive crystal chandelier hung overhead, refracting light into thousands of tiny rainbows that scattered across the walls. "Welcome to Grant Mansion," announced a staff member in a crisp, dark suit. "Please follow me to the exhibition hall." Tommy held his project closer, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding him. The staff member led them deeper into the mansion, past artwork that probably cost more than his mother would earn in a decade. Other children from wealthier schools were already there, their projects displayed on elegant tables with professional-looking presentation boards. As they approached the exhibition hall, Tommy noticed a girl about his age standing near the entrance. Unlike the staff, she wore no uniform, just an expensive-looking blue dress that matched her eyes. Her golden hair was pulled back in a perfect French braid, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in these grand surroundings. "That's Sophia Grant," Ellie whispered. "Maxwell Grant's daughter." Tommy's eyes widened. Of course, this was her home. She looked like a princess from one of the storybooks his mother used to read to him. Sophia was directing other students, pointing them toward different tables. Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to giving orders. When Tommy's group approached, Sophia's gaze swept over them, lingering momentarily on Tommy's mended suit and scuffed shoes. A slight frown creased her forehead. "Central District Elementary, right?" she asked, consulting a tablet in her hands. "You're at the back tables, by the west windows." Tommy noticed the slight curl of her lip as she said, "back tables." As his classmates shuffled toward their assigned area, Tommy paused, gathering his courage. "Excuse me," he said, smiling shyly at Sophia. "I'm really excited to be here. I made a renewable energy converter that could help families in my neighborhood save on electricity costs." Sophia looked up from her tablet, her expression shifting from boredom to faint amusement. Her eyes drifted to his project, constructed from recycled parts and housed in a cardboard box that had been carefully painted blue. His attempt to make it look more professional. "That's interesting," she replied, her tone making it clear it was anything but. "Did you make that out of trash?" Tommy's smile faltered. "I repurposed materials that would have been thrown away. That's part of the innovation, using what others discard to create something valuable." A group of children from another school had gathered nearby, wearing matching blazers with embroidered crests. They snickered at Sophia's comment, and one boy whispered something that made the others laugh harder. Sophia glanced at them, then back at Tommy. Her voice rose just enough to ensure the others could hear. "You really think you have a chance here? My father doesn't fund science projects made from garbage." The words hit Tommy like a physical blow. Heat rushed to his face as the other children's laughter grew louder. "It's not garbage," he said quietly, feeling his throat tighten. "It's innovation." "Sure it is," Sophia rolled her eyes, then turned to her friends. "He actually thinks he can compete with the Palmer Prep Robotics team or Westridge Academy's fusion project." Tommy stood frozen, his project suddenly feeling inadequate in his hands. He thought of his mother, how she'd stayed up late mending his suit, how she'd kissed his forehead this morning and told him she believed in him. "My mom says what matters isn't how much something costs," Tommy said, finding his voice again, "but the thought and care put into creating it." Sophia's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, a staff member called her name. With a final dismissive glance at Tommy, she turned and walked away, rejoining her friends who were still watching him with undisguised contempt. Tommy took a deep breath, remembering his mother's words from countless difficult moments. "Always hold your head high, Tommy. Your worth isn't determined by what others think of you." With quiet dignity that belied his 7 years, Tommy straightened his shoulders and walked toward the back tables, his heart heavy, but his resolve intact. He would show them all what a boy from Central District could do, even one with scuffed shoes and a second-hand suit. "Before you set up your projects, we'll be taking a special tour of Grant Mansion," announced a tall woman in a sleek business suit, her Grant Enterprises badge gleaming under the chandelier lights. "Mr. Grant believes in inspiring young minds by showing them what innovation can achieve." Tommy placed his project carefully on his assigned table before joining his classmates. Despite Sophia's cutting remarks, his curiosity about the legendary mansion overshadowed his hurt feelings. The tour began in the mansion's east wing, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city below. Tommy could almost see his neighborhood from here, the buildings looking like tiny models from this height. The Grant Mansion was designed by renowned architect Julian Chen, their guide explained, leading them through rooms larger than Tommy's entire apartment. It features smart home technology developed by Grant Enterprises, controlling everything from temperature to security with voice commands. As they moved through lavishly decorated rooms, Tommy noticed how his teachers' voices took on an unnaturally enthusiastic tone whenever staff members were nearby. Ms. Wilson, normally calm and measured, now laughed too loudly at their guide's mild jokes and repeatedly mentioned how honored their underprivileged school was to be included. The tour continued. Downstairs, where the true wonders began. This is the heart of innovation at Grant Mansion, their guide announced as they entered a vast underground laboratory, where Mr. Grant's visionaries developed technologies that will shape tomorrow. Tommy's eyes widened in wonder. The laboratory was like something from a science fiction movie. Researchers in white coats working at sleek computer stations, holographic displays projecting 3D models, and glass-walled testing chambers housing prototypes of gadgets Tommy couldn't even identify. "Is this where Mr. Grant works?" Tommy asked, unable to contain his curiosity. The guide smiled indulgently. "Mr. Grant oversees operations from his private offices upstairs, but he visits the labs regularly to inspire his teams." As they passed a section dedicated to renewable energy research, Tommy slowed, mesmerized by a project that seemed like an advanced version of his own crude invention. Scientists were testing solar panels no thicker than paper, capable of generating remarkable power outputs. "Please keep up with the group," the guide called, noticing Tommy lagging behind. "Sorry," he mumbled, reluctantly rejoining his classmates. "I just wanted to see the solar technology." As they rounded a corner, a flurry of activity erupted ahead. Staff members straightened their postures, researchers abandoned their stations to line up, and photographers materialized seemingly out of nowhere. "It appears we're in for a treat," their guide said, her voice tightening with nervous excitement. "Mr. Grant is making an appearance." A hush fell over the laboratory as Maxwell Grant entered, flanked by assistants clutching tablets. He was taller than Tommy had expected, impeccably dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and camera-ready. "Welcome, young innovators." Maxwell addressed the children, his voice resonant and commanding. "I hope you're enjoying your tour of our humble home." Humble was the last word Tommy would use to describe the mansion, but he noticed how everyone around him nodded enthusiastically. Maxwell continued speaking about the importance of education and innovation, but Tommy's attention drifted to Sophia, who had appeared at her father's side. She stood slightly behind him, observing the group with thinly veiled boredom. When her gaze fell on Tommy, a flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a smirk. Tommy watched in fascination as cameras captured Maxwell shaking hands with teachers and patting children's heads. Everyone seemed transformed in his presence. Adults became fawning and deferential, while students straightened their postures and widened their eyes with manufactured awe. "The future begins with young minds like yours," Maxwell concluded his speech, checking his watch discreetly. "I look forward to seeing your projects upstairs." With that, he was gone in a whirlwind of flashing cameras and murmured praise, leaving behind an almost tangible vacuum. Sophia lingered a moment longer, her gaze sweeping dismissively over the charity cases before following her father. As they were led back upstairs toward the exhibition hall, Tommy couldn't help but wonder if Maxwell Grant would really look at their projects or if this was all for show, a performance of philanthropy carefully documented for the press. Either way, he was determined to make his mother proud. Back in the grand exhibition hall, students rushed to put final touches on their projects before judging began. The massive room, once a ballroom according to their guide, now resembled a high-end science fair. Professionally printed banners hung from elaborate display stands at the tables of prestigious private schools, while Tommy and his classmates made do with handwritten posters and cardboard backdrops. Tommy carefully positioned his renewable energy converter on the table, arranging the small LED lights to demonstrate how his creation captured and stored energy. Despite its humble appearance, he knew his project worked and worked well. The science behind it was sound, even if the materials were salvaged. "You have 30 minutes before Mr. Grant begins his evaluations," announced one of the staff members. "Make sure your presentations are ready." Nervous energy filled the room as students made last-minute adjustments. Tommy noticed a group from Westridge Academy testing their fusion reactor model with confident smiles. Their project was housed in a gleaming metal case with digital displays and professional labels. "Don't let it intimidate you," Ms. Wilson said, appearing at Tommy's side. "Your project shows remarkable ingenuity, especially considering the resources you had." Tommy nodded, trying to focus on his teacher's encouragement rather than the growing knot in his stomach. He connected the final wire and smiled as all 5 LED lights illuminated simultaneously. "It works!" he exclaimed. "Of course it does," Ms. Wilson said with a genuine smile. "Now practice your explanation one more time." As Tommy rehearsed his presentation, he couldn't help but notice Sophia leading her father around the room, starting with the projects from the wealthiest schools. Maxwell Grant nodded approvingly at each display, occasionally asking questions while photographers captured every interaction. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly as Tommy waited for his turn. Finally, the Grant entourage began making its way toward the back tables where Central District Elementary was stationed. Tommy's heart pounded against his ribs. This was his moment, the chance to show Maxwell Grant what he could do, to potentially change his and his mother's lives forever. As the group approached, Tommy noticed Maxwell, checking his watch with increasing frequency. Would he even take the time to understand Tommy's project, or would he simply nod politely and move on? "And what do we have here?" Maxwell asked, his attention finally turning to Tommy's table. "Sir, I made a renewable energy converter," Tommy began, his voice initially faltering before finding strength. "It captures solar energy and stores it efficiently using components I salvaged and modified." Maxwell raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely surprised. "You built this yourself?" "Yes, sir. The circuit design allows for..." As Tommy reached to demonstrate how the energy flowed through his modified pathways, his elbow knocked against a small remote he'd placed on the table. He fumbled to catch it, taking a step backward without looking. His heel caught on something, and Tommy felt himself stumbling. Trying to regain his balance, he reached out blindly, his hand grasping at air before connecting with something solid. A pedestal he hadn't noticed before. Time seemed to slow as Tommy watched in horror as the pedestal wobbled. Atop it sat a vase of deep cobalt blue with intricate white patterns, clearly ancient and undoubtedly valuable. "No," Tommy gasped, lunging forward. His fingers brushed the vase's smooth surface, almost grasping it, but physics was unforgiving. The vase tumbled through the air, spinning once before connecting with the marble floor. The sound of shattering porcelain silenced the entire hall. Priceless ceramic fragments skittered across the polished floor like blue snowflakes. For a terrible moment, no one moved or spoke. Tommy stood frozen, his hand still outstretched, his face a mask of pure horror. Then Maxwell Grant's voice cut through the silence, cold as ice and sharp as the ceramic shards at their feet. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Tommy looked up into the man's face, now contorted with fury, and felt his world collapse around him. "That," Maxwell hissed, "was a Ming Dynasty vase, worth $20,000. Behind her father, Sophia's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "Security!" Maxwell Grant's voice thundered through the exhibition hall. "Remove this child immediately." Tommy stood paralyzed, his gaze fixed on the shattered remains of the Ming vase. Each blue shard reflected the overhead lights, creating a constellation of his mistake across the marble floor. I'm sorry," Tommy stammered, his voice barely audible. "It was an accident." Maxwell's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "An accident? You've destroyed a priceless artifact." He turned to Ms. Wilson, who had rushed to Tommy's side. "Is this how you supervise your students? Who's responsible for this? "Mr. Grant," Ms. Wilson began, her voice trembling. "Tommy is one of our brightest students. It truly was an accident." A security guard in a dark suit appeared, moving with practiced efficiency through the crowd of stunned onlookers. "Your school could never afford to compensate for this loss," Maxwell continued, addressing Ms. Wilson but glaring at Tommy. This face was over 300 years old. The guard reached Tommy and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Come with me, son." Tommy looked desperately toward his teacher, hoping for intervention, but Ms. Wilson had gone pale, clearly intimidated by Maxwell's authority and wealth. The other teachers from Central District stood back, eyes averted, unwilling to challenge the man whose foundation funded critical programs at their struggling school. "Please, Mr. Grant," Tommy tried again, his voice breaking. "I can work to pay for it. I can pay for it," Maxwell scoffed. "With what? Your little science project made of trash? Do you have any concept of value?" Each word struck Tommy like a physical blow. He felt tears welling in his eyes but fought them back, remembering his mother's daily reminder about facing difficulties with dignity. Sophia stood slightly behind her father, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When she caught Tommy looking at her, she raised an eyebrow as if to say, "I told you so." The security guard began guiding Tommy toward the exit, his grip unnecessarily tight on the boy's small shoulder. Tommy's classmates watched in stunned silence, none daring to speak up. "Your school is banned from future Grant Foundation events," Maxwell announced to the Central District teachers. "People like you don't belong in places like this." The words hung in the air, their true meaning unmistakable to everyone present. It wasn't just about the vase, it was about class, about wealth, about who deserved to be in these hallowed halls. As Tommy was led through the grand foyer, past displays of wealth that now seemed to mock his very existence, he heard the murmurs of the other children, a mixture of pity and poorly concealed schadenfreude. "I knew those charity cases would cause trouble," someone whispered. Tommy kept his head up, though each step felt heavier than the last. They passed through the enormous front doors, down the sweeping stairs, and across the circular driveway. "Wait. At the bus," the security guard instructed gruffly, releasing Tommy's shoulder. "Your school will be departing early." With that, the man turned and walked back inside, leaving Tommy alone on the vast driveway. The spring afternoon had turned suddenly cold. Dark clouds gathered overhead, matching Tommy's darkening spirits. A gust of wind scattered fallen cherry blossoms across the immaculate pavement, swirling them around his feet like pale pink snowflakes. Tommy stood motionless, the weight of his failure crushing down on him. He had come here with such hope, dreams of impressing Maxwell Grant, of securing funding that could change his and his mother's lives. Instead, he'd caused thousands of dollars in damage and gotten his entire school banned from future opportunities. How would he explain this to his mother? Sarah, who had stayed up late mending his suit, who believed in him without reservation, who had sacrificed so much to give him every opportunity she could afford. The first raindrop fell, landing on Tommy's cheek and mingling with the tear he could no longer hold back. Then another drop, and another, until the sky opened up and rain poured down, soaking through his second-hand suit. Tommy didn't move to seek shelter. The cold rain matched his inner desolation, and somehow, standing there letting the water wash over him felt right, as if the universe itself were trying to cleanse him of his shame. But some stains he knew could never be washed away. Tommy stood in the driving rain, his clothes soaked through, his dreams shattered like the Ming vase. On the marble floor, behind him, the massive doors of Grant Mansion remained closed, a physical barrier between his world and the one he'd briefly glimpsed. As he turned to walk toward the waiting school bus, something shifted inside him. The initial shock and shame gave way to a quiet, burning sense of injustice. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Your worth isn't determined by what others think of you, but by how you respond when life knocks you down." Tommy paused mid-step, then slowly turned back toward the mansion. With deliberate movements, he climbed the sweeping stairs once more, rain streaming down his face, his small shoulders squared with newfound resolve. Inside, Maxwell Grant was still berating the Central District teachers, photographers having discreetly withdrawn to avoid capturing his rage. Sophia stood with her friends, whispering and occasionally glancing at the shattered vase where staff members carefully collected each precious fragment. Tommy pushed open one of the heavy doors, the sound causing heads to turn. Water dripped from his clothes onto the immaculate floor as he walked back into the foyer, leaving small puddles in his wake. "Young man," A security guard began, moving to intercept him. Tommy raised his hand in a surprisingly adult gesture. "One moment, please. I need to say something." The quiet dignity in his voice gave the guard pause. The room fell silent as Tommy approached Maxwell Grant, stopping at a respectful distance. "Mr. Grant," Tommy said, his voice clear and unwavering despite his racing heart. "I came here today because I believed innovation could come from anywhere, even from a boy who can't afford new shoes." Maxwell's expression darkened. "You've done enough damage. My mother," Tommy continued undeterred, "works 2 jobs and still finds time to help me with my projects. She taught me that the most important things in life aren't things at all." He glanced at the broken vase, then back at Maxwell. "I am truly sorry about your vase. It was beautiful, and I know it was valuable." The room remained silent. Everyone, transfixed by the soaking wet 7-year-old addressing the billionaire with such composure. "But my mother also taught me that possessions can be replaced," Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger. "Character cannot." A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. Maxwell's face flushed anew with indignation. "I promise you, Mr. Grant," Tommy said, looking the man directly in the eyes, "that one day I will pay back every cent of what that vase was worth. Not because you humiliated me, but because it's the right thing to do." He paused, then delivered his final words with quiet conviction. "I'm sorry about your vase, sir. But I'm sorrier for you. You have all this." He gestured to the opulent surroundings. "But you couldn't show kindness to a child who made a mistake." Complete silence followed. Maxwell Grant seemed momentarily at a loss for words, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Even Sophia had stopped whispering, her expression unreadable as she stared at Tommy. In the back of the room, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes watched the scene unfold with growing interest. Dr. Robert Coleman, a former science professor now consulting for the Grant Foundation, studied the boy with a thoughtful expression. "Get him out of here," Maxwell finally sputtered, turning away. This time Tommy didn't wait for the security guard. He turned with quiet dignity and walked toward the exit, head held high despite the water still dripping from his clothes. As he reached the door, Tommy heard a voice call out, "Young man." He turned to see the silver-haired gentleman approaching. "My name is Dr. Coleman," the man said, removing his jacket and draping it over Tommy's shoulders. "I believe we should talk." Tommy looked up, confused by this unexpected kindness. "That took extraordinary courage," Dr. Coleman continued, opening an umbrella as they stepped outside, "and rather remarkable eloquence for someone your age." As they descended the mansion steps together, the rain began to subside, a few tentative rays of sunshine breaking through the clouds. Behind them, inside the mansion, the echo of Tommy's words lingered in the air, touching hearts and planting seeds that would, in time, bear unexpected fruit. Tommy sat in the passenger seat of Dr. Coleman's modest sedan, his renewable energy project carefully placed on the back seat. The older man drove with calm confidence through the winding streets leading down from the wealthy hillside neighborhood. "So, you're interested in renewable energy?" Dr. Coleman asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Tommy nodded, still processing the day's dramatic events. "Yes, sir. I want to make electricity affordable for everyone, especially people in my neighborhood. Sometimes the power gets shut off when people can't pay." He thought of the Rodriguez family in apartment 2C, whose 3 children had to do homework by candlelight last winter. "A noble goal," Dr. Coleman said, genuine interest in his voice. "Tell me how your device works." As Tommy explained the principles behind his creation, Dr. Coleman occasionally nodded or asked insightful questions. Unlike Maxwell Grant, he didn't seem to care that the project was housed in a painted cardboard box or built from salvaged parts. "Remarkable," the older man murmured when Tommy finished. "You've intuitively grasped concepts most university students struggle with. Who taught you about circuitry?" "Nobody, really," Tommy admitted. I read books from the library and watch videos online at school since we don't have internet at home. Sometimes I take apart broken things to see how they work. Dr. Coleman glanced at him with newfound respect. Self-taught then, that's even more impressive. They turned onto Tommy Street. The contrast between the Grant neighborhood and Central District stark and immediate. Here buildings showed their age, sidewalks cracked under the pressure of neglect, and chain-link fences surrounded patches of struggling grass. That's our building. Tommy pointed to a 3-story brick apartment complex with fading paint. Apartment 4B. As Dr. Coleman parked, Tommy's anxiety returned. My mom's probably still at work. She doesn't get home from the diner until 4. Then perhaps I should wait and speak with her, Dr. Coleman suggested. I have a proposition that might interest both of you. Tommy led the way up 3 flights of stairs, apologizing for the elevator that had been temporarily out of service for the past 8 months. He unlocked the apartment door with the key he kept on a string around his neck. It's not much, Tommy said self-consciously as they entered the small living space. Dr. Coleman looked around, taking in the worn but immaculately clean furniture, the bookshelf overflowing with library books and the kitchen table still covered with Sarah's sewing materials. It's a home, he said simply, without pity or judgment. You can tell a lot about people from their homes. Yours speaks of hard work, education, and love. Tommy relaxed slightly at these words, offering Dr. Coleman a glass of water before carefully putting away his mother's sewing kit. May I ask why you were at the Grant mansion today? Tommy asked as they sat at the kitchen table. You don't seem like the other people there. Dr. Coleman smiled. Perceptive of you. I used to be a professor of applied sciences at State University. Now I consult for the Grant Foundation's educational initiatives, though after today I'm reconsidering that arrangement. He took a sip of water. Maxwell wasn't always like that, you know. Success changed him, I'm afraid. At that moment, they heard keys in the door. Sarah Brooks entered, still wearing her diner uniform, exhaustion evident in her face until she saw Tommy. You're home early, she began with a smile that quickly faded when she noticed the unfamiliar man at her kitchen table. What's happened? Is everything all right? Tommy rushed to her side. Mom, this is Dr. Coleman. He brought me home from the Grant mansion. Sarah's concerned gaze moved between her son and the visitor. Why? What happened to the school bus? Over the next few minutes, Tommy explained the day's events, his voice faltering when he described breaking the vase but strengthening again as he recounted his return to speak his piece. Sarah listened with growing dismay, then pride as her son described standing up for himself. When he finished, she turned to Dr. Coleman. I'm grateful you brought him home, but I'm still not clear on why. Mrs. Brooks, Dr. Coleman began, your son demonstrated extraordinary character today, not to mention remarkable scientific aptitude. I'd like to invite you both to dinner this weekend at my home. My wife Janet and I would be honored to have you. He pulled out a business card. I believe I may be able to offer some guidance for Tommy's scientific interests, if you're amenable, of course. Sarah looked at the card, then at her son's hopeful face. What had begun as a day of disaster seemed to be taking an unexpected turn. We'd be delighted, she said finally, extending her hand to Dr. Coleman. And please call me Sarah. 3 years passed like turning pages in a well-loved book. Tommy, now 10 years old, sat at the Coleman's kitchen table, his fingers flying, over a set of technical drawings. His face, losing its childish roundness, was set in concentration as he made precise adjustments to his design. The efficiency could be improved if we reconfigure the collection panel, he muttered, more to himself than to Dr. Coleman, who sat across from him nursing a cup of tea. Perhaps, Robert agreed, leaning forward to examine Tommy's work. But consider the cost implications for mass production. Innovation isn't just about what works best. It's about what works best at a price point accessible to those who need it most. This had become their routine over the past 3 years. What began as occasional dinner invitations had evolved into regular weekend sessions at the Coleman's comfortable suburban home. Robert mentored Tommy in physics and engineering, while Janet, a retired chef, taught him culinary skills, both practical education and creative outlet. Today, they were refining Tommy's expanded renewable energy project, no longer housed in a cardboard box, but now a sophisticated prototype that could potentially provide affordable electricity to communities like Tommy's neighborhood. "Look who made cinnamon rolls," Janet announced, entering with a plate of freshly baked pastries. At 70, she moved more slowly than she once did, but her kitchen remained her domain. Tommy's face lit up. "Thanks, Janet, they smell amazing." "The secret is in the proofing time," she winked, setting down the plate. "Something your mother mastered quickly." Indeed, Sarah had found an unexpected friend in Janet. Despite their different backgrounds, Janet, the retired chef who had worked in five-star restaurants, Sarah, the diner waitress still taking night classes, they had formed a genuine bond. Janet had even helped Sarah secure a better-paying hostess position at an upscale restaurant owned by a former colleague, allowing her to quit the convenience store job and spend more time on her nursing studies. "Speaking of Mom," Tommy said, checking his watch, "she should be here soon. Her class ended at noon." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Janet returned moments later with Sarah, who was clutching a newspaper with an excited expression. "Have you seen this?" she asked, spreading the business section on the table. Grant Enterprises stock fell another 12% yesterday. The headline read, "Grant Enterprises continues downward spiral. Innovation drought raises questions about leadership." Robert adjusted his reading glasses. Maxwell's been making questionable decisions for years. The board's finally taking notice. "The article mentions they've had no significant new products in 18 months, Sarah noted, and their renewable energy division is hemorrhaging talent to competitors." Tommy studied the article with unexpected intensity. The name Grant still stirred complicated feelings, humiliation, anger, but also determination. That day at the mansion had changed the trajectory of his life, though not in the way he'd initially hoped. "Tommy," Robert said, breaking the boys' reverie, "I think your project is ready for the next stage." "What do you mean?" Tommy looked up. "I mean it's time to consider patenting your design." Robert's voice was serious. "What you've created here isn't just a school project anymore. It's a potentially viable product." The adults exchanged glances. This was clearly a conversation they'd had privately before. "Patent," Tommy repeated, the adult word feeling strange on his tongue. "But that costs thousands of dollars." Sarah sat beside her son. "It does. But Dr. Coleman and I have been discussing options." "Call me Robert, please," the older man interjected with a smile. "After 3 years, I think we're well past formalities." "Robert believes in your invention," Sarah continued. "Enough to." She hesitated, still uncomfortable with accepting significant help. Robert leaned forward, addressing Tommy directly. "I'd like to invest in your future, Tommy, not charity and investment. I believe your energy solution could help countless families, and yes, potentially be profitable." Tommy looked between his mother and his mentor, processing this unexpected development. "You've grown so much since that day at the mansion," Robert continued. "Not just in height or knowledge, but in purpose. You took that experience, and instead of letting it defeat you, you channeled it into something meaningful." Tommy glanced down at his drawings, the culmination of 3 years of guidance, hard work, and determination. What had begun as a child's science project had evolved into something with real potential. "What do you think, Tommy?" Sarah asked, watching her son's thoughtful expression. Tommy considered the newspaper headline, the patent proposal, and the journey that had led him here. A slow smile spread across his face. "I think," he said with newfound confidence, "it's time to take the next step." 7 years later. The sleek glass headquarters of Tommy's Tech stood in stark contrast to the surrounding neighborhood, a deliberate choice by its 17-year-old founder. Tommy Brooks had insisted on building his company's home in Central District, bringing jobs and opportunity to the community that raised him. "The quarterly numbers look excellent," Sarah said, sliding a tablet across the conference table to her son. Now the operations director of Tommy's Tech, she had completed her nursing degree but discovered an unexpected talent for business management. "The West Side housing project installation is complete. and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Tommy, tall and lean with his mother's warm eyes and quiet confidence, studied the data. Gone was the second-hand suit from a thrift store. Today he wore a simple but well-tailored navy blazer over a white shirt, his personal uniform as the young CEO of a rapidly growing company. 237 families with reliable, affordable electricity, he noted with satisfaction. That's what matters most. Robert Coleman, now in his late 70s but still sharp as ever, smiled from across the table. As Tommy's Tech's lead scientific advisor, he had watched his protege grow from a curious child into a visionary young man. The efficiency improvements on the Mark IV units are impressive, Robert said. 23% more output while maintaining the same price point. Janet Coleman entered the conference room carrying a tray of sandwiches. Despite Tommy's offers to hire catering, she insisted on providing lunch for their strategy meetings, a tradition from those early days. Around her kitchen table, "No proper thinking happens on an empty stomach," she announced, setting down the tray. Though now using a cane, Janet remained a force of nature, volunteering her time between Tommy's Tech and community cooking classes she'd established for local children. Tommy smiled at this surrogate family he'd found. Their belief in him had been the foundation upon which he'd built everything. The journey hadn't been easy. Securing the patent had been just the beginning. There had been prototype failures, funding challenges, and moments of doubt. But with Robert's guidance, Sarah's unwavering support, and his own determination, Tommy had transformed his childhood invention into Tommy's Tech, a company dedicated to providing affordable energy solutions to low-income communities. Their first major success came when a neighboring city installed Tommy's renewable energy systems in a public housing development, cutting residents' electricity bills by nearly 60%. The success story caught media attention, and suddenly, the boy CEO, as newspapers called him, was being hailed as an innovator reimagining energy access. Now, 3 years after its official founding, Tommy's Tech employed 37 people, had installations in 3 states, and was being courted by international development organizations interested in bringing the technology to emerging markets. "Before we finish," Tommy said, glancing at his watch, "we need to discuss the Innovation Expo next week." Sarah's expression shifted slightly. "Are you sure you want to attend? Grant Enterprises will be there." The name still carried weight in their conversations. Maxwell Grant's company had continued its decline over the years, with rumors of layoffs and desperate attempts to recapture market relevance. "I'm sure," Tommy said firmly. "Our booth is directly across from theirs in the main exhibition hall. It wasn't my request, but I'm not going to hide from them either." Robert studied his protege thoughtfully. "Just remember why we're doing this, Tommy. It's not about revenge or vindication. It never has been," Tommy assured him, though the memory of that humiliating day at Grant Mansion remained vivid. "It's about proving that innovation can come from anywhere, even from a kid who couldn't afford new shoes." He smiled, using the same words he'd spoken to Maxwell Grant 10 years ago. As their meeting concluded, Tommy walked to the large windows overlooking Central District. From this height, he could see his old apartment building, the community center where his company sponsored after-school science programs, and the park where he'd once collected discarded electronics to disassemble and study. His phone buzzed, with a notification, the final confirmation for their booth at the Innovation Expo. Tommy felt a curious mix of emotions knowing he would soon face Maxwell Grant again, not as a humiliated child, but as a peer in the industry Maxwell once dominated. "Whatever happens," Tommy murmured to himself, "I'll remember what matters." He turned back to his team, his family, with renewed purpose. The past had shaped him, but it was the future he was building that truly mattered now. The Innovation Expo transformed the city's convention center into a showcase of cutting-edge technology. Company booths lined the massive hall, each displaying their vision of the future, from artificial intelligence to space technology, medical breakthroughs, to environmental solutions. Tommy's Tech's booth stood out for its elegant simplicity. Rather than flashy displays, they featured working models of their renewable energy systems, alongside before and after testimonials from families whose lives had been changed by affordable electricity. A large screen showed real-time data from their community installations across the country. "We've had representatives from 3 municipal governments request meetings," Sarah reported, checking her tablet. "And that venture capital firm from San Francisco wants to discuss international expansion." Tommy nodded, adjusting the small prototype on display. "Schedule them for tomorrow if possible. I want to be fully present for these conversations." Throughout the morning, their booth had attracted steady interest. Industry professionals, environmental activists, and policymakers drawn by the company's growing reputation. Tommy, despite his youth, handled each interaction with the confidence of someone who thoroughly understood his field and his purpose. Around midday, he noticed a flurry of activity across the aisle. The Grant Enterprises booth, larger and more ostentatious than most, was preparing for what appeared to be a press event. Staff frantically adjusted lighting and positioned cameras. "Mr. Grant is finally making his appearance," Robert observed, joining Tommy. "He's missed the opening 2 days." Tommy watched with curious detachment as Maxwell Grant arrived, flanked by assistants. The years had not been kind to the once imposing CEO. Though still impeccably dressed, his face showed the strain of his company's decline. New lines etched by stress, his hair now more silver than pepper. Following closely behind him was a young woman Tommy didn't immediately recognize. Tall and poised in a tailored business suit, she directed staff with practiced authority before taking position beside Maxwell. "That's Sophia," Sarah whispered, following Tommy's gaze. "Maxwell's daughter." Tommy blinked in surprise. The haughty 12-year-old who had mocked his second-hand clothes had grown into a composed young executive. As if sensing his attention, Sophia glanced across the aisle, her eyes briefly meeting Tommy's before she looked away, her expression unreadable. The Grant Enterprises presentation began, Maxwell announcing their latest attempt at innovation, a renewable energy system suspiciously similar to earlier versions of Tommy's technology. The gathered press seemed underwhelmed, several journalists glancing toward Tommy's text booth for comparison. As the crowd dispersed, Maxwell finally noticed the booth across from his. His eyes narrowed as he read the company name, then widened, with recognition as he spotted Tommy. After a moment's hesitation, Maxwell crossed the aisle, Sophia trailing reluctantly behind. "Tommy Brooks," Maxwell said, extending his hand with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard impressive things about your company." Tommy accepted the handshake, keeping his expression neutral. "Mr. Grant, your energy solutions have been getting attention in circles I frequent," Maxwell continued, his tone suggesting he was conferring a great honor by acknowledging Tommy's existence. "I've been following your progress with interest." Tommy doubted that very much. What seemed more likely was that Maxwell had just been briefed on potential competitors moments before. "Your presentation was interesting," Tommy replied diplomatically, though I couldn't help noticing similarities to our third-generation system from 2 years ago. Maxwell's smile tightened. "Great minds often travel similar paths. Or some minds follow the paths others have already cleared," Robert interjected, mildly joining the conversation. Maxwell's gaze flicked to Robert with a flash of recognition, then back to Tommy. "We should discuss potential collaboration. Grant Enterprises' resources combined with your grassroots approach could be mutually beneficial." The subtext was clear. Maxwell was offering to absorb Tommy's company, to purchase the innovation he couldn't outcompete. "That's a generous offer," Tommy replied, his voice level. "But Tommy's tech isn't for sale. Our mission is too important to compromise." Maxwell's facade of geniality slipped momentarily. "Everyone has a price." Tommy smiled, genuinely this time. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Grant. Some things aren't for sale at any price." Before Maxwell could respond, one of his assistants urgently summoned him back to their booth where a potential investor was waiting. As Maxwell turned to leave, Sophia lingered, her eyes studying Tommy with an intensity that suggested she was seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. "Congratulations on your success," she said quietly, then followed her father, leaving Tommy to wonder how much of the girl who had mocked him remained in the woman she had become. 2 months after the Innovation Expo, Tommy sat in his office, reviewing expansion plans when Sarah entered with an unusual expression on her face. "You need to see this," she said, placing a newspaper on his desk. The business section headline leapt out immediately. "Grant Mansion to be auctioned. Grant Enterprises. Bankruptcy proceedings begin." Tommy read the article with growing astonishment. Grant Enterprises had filed for bankruptcy protection after years of declining revenues, failed product launches, and mounting debt. As part of the proceedings, Maxwell Grant's personal assets, including the iconic Grant Mansion, would be auctioned to satisfy creditors. "It's hard to believe," Tommy said, leaning back in his chair. "That mansion seemed like the epicenter of power when I was 7. Sarah studied her son's face. "How does it make you feel?" Tommy considered the question carefully. "Not satisfaction, if that's what you're wondering. No one deserves to lose everything they've built." The phone rang, Robert calling from his home office after seeing the same news. "Have you heard?" the older man asked without preamble. "Just reading it now," Tommy confirmed. "Seems surreal." "There's something you should know," Robert said, his voice taking on a serious tone. "Something I discovered years ago but never had concrete proof of until recently." Tommy straightened in his chair, putting the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. "After the vase incident," Robert continued, "I remained at the Grant Foundation for several months. During that time, I noticed unusual activity in the R&D department. They were suddenly developing renewable energy concepts remarkably similar to the project you'd brought that day." Tommy and Sarah exchanged shocked glances. "Are you saying—" "I believe someone at Grant Enterprises, possibly Maxwell himself, attempted to replicate your childhood invention after you left it behind during the commotion." Tommy remembered his project, abandoned on the table in the chaos following the vase breaking. He'd been so devastated he hadn't even thought to retrieve it. "They tried to steal a child's idea?" Sarah's voice was incredulous. "I suspected as much," Robert confirmed, "but could never prove it. Their prototypes failed because they didn't understand the fundamental principles you'd intuitively grasped. But the attempt was there." Tommy absorbed this revelation, connecting it to Maxwell's strange interest in collaboration at the expo. "There's more," Robert added. "The auction listing includes contents of the mansion, which would include all corporate archives stored there. If you were to acquire those, I'd have proof." Tommy finished the thought. A complex mix of emotions washed over him, not vindictiveness or triumph, but a sense that something incomplete might finally find resolution. After ending the call, Tommy sat in silence for several minutes. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked finally. "I'm thinking about that day," Tommy replied. "How one accident seemed to destroy all our hopes. How it felt to be humiliated and dismissed because of where we came from." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the community his company now served. "But I'm also thinking about how that day led to meeting Robert and Janet, to finding my path. Everything we've built started from that moment of adversity." Sarah joined him at the window. "So what will you do about the auction?" Tommy turned to his mother, his decision made. "I'm going to buy the mansion." The declaration hung in the air between them. "Not out of revenge," Tommy clarified, "but because I have a vision for what that place could become." Over the next 3 weeks, Tommy worked with his company's legal team to prepare for the auction. He established an anonymous holding company to make the purchase, wanting the transaction evaluated on its merits rather than emotions. On auction day, Tommy stood at the back of the room as the auctioneer described the property. 11 acres, 15,000 square feet of living space, the prestigious history of the Grant family residence. The irony wasn't lost on him. This palace that had once seemed so unattainable was now within his reach. As the bidding began, Tommy remained silent, watching wealthy developers and investment groups compete. Only when the bidding had nearly concluded did he raise his paddle, entering with a figure that silenced the room. The auctioneer's gavel fell with finality. "Sold to Brooks Holdings." In that moment, Tommy felt no triumph, only the weight of responsibility for transforming a symbol of exclusion into something more aligned with his vision of accessibility and opportunity. The mansion that had once expelled him would now become his to reimagine. Gray clouds hung low over Grant Mansion as Tommy's car pulled through the ornate gates that had once seemed so impenetrable. As the new owner, he'd arranged to inspect the property the same day Maxwell and Sophia were scheduled to remove their personal belongings, a deliberate choice that would force a long-overdue confrontation. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Sarah asked from the passenger seat. "We could come back tomorrow." Tommy shook his head. "Some conversations need to happen in person." The mansion looked different than he remembered, still imposing but somehow diminished. Its grandeur faded like an old photograph. Without staff maintaining the grounds, the manicured gardens had already begun to surrender to nature's disorder. As they approached the massive front doors, Tommy was struck by the memory of standing here as a soaking wet 7-year-old, summoning the courage to return and speak his truth to Maxwell Grant. Now, 10 years later, he returned not as a visitor, but as the owner. Inside, the foyer echoed with the sounds of activity, moving boxes being filled, artwork being carefully wrapped, voices directing which items to take and which to leave. Tommy recognized Maxwell's voice immediately, sharp with irritation, as he supervised the removal process. When Tommy and Sarah stepped into view, a stunned silence fell over the room. Maxwell stood frozen beside a half-packed crate of awards and memorabilia, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and finally outrage. "You?" he managed, his complexion reddening. "Brooks Holdings is you?" Tommy nodded once, maintaining his composure. "Good morning, Mr. Grant." Maxwell's disbelief quickly hardened into anger. "This is why you bid anonymously, so I wouldn't know it was you taking my home?" "I bid anonymously because I wanted the transaction evaluated on its financial merits, not emotional history," Tommy replied evenly. From the grand staircase came the click of heels as Sophia descended, drawn by the commotion. She paused halfway, down, her expression inscrutable as she took in the scene. "What is this?" Maxwell demanded, gesturing wildly around the mansion. "Some kind of twisted revenge? The poor boy returns to claim the castle?" Sarah stepped forward protectively, but Tommy gently touched her arm, signaling he could handle this. "This isn't about revenge, Mr. Grant, it's about transformation. This property has tremendous potential that extends beyond being one family's symbol of status." Maxwell scoffed. "You can't just walk in and take everything we've built." "Everything you built?" Tommy interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Like the renewable energy technology your company tried to develop after seeing my childhood project?" The accusation landed with precision. Maxwell's mouth opened, then closed without response. "A $20,000 vase meant nothing to you," Tommy continued, referencing the pivotal moment from their past. "But it meant everything to me. It changed the trajectory of my life, though not in the way either of us could have predicted." The room remained silent as the two faced each other, the fallen titan and the rising innovator whose paths had been intertwined by fate and choice. "And now," Maxwell said bitterly, "you'll throw us out with nothing, I suppose. The perfect circle of humiliation." "Actually," Tommy replied, "I'm not here to evict you today. I'm here to inspect what I've purchased and to show respect by speaking with you directly about my plans." He turned to include Sophia in his gaze. "This mansion will be transformed, but you have time to make proper arrangements. The transition will be handled with dignity, the dignity you once denied a 7-year-old boy." Sophia finally descended the remaining stairs, placing a restraining hand on her father's arm as he began another angry retort. "Thank you for that consideration," she said, her voice neutral yet carrying a note of something like remorse. "What exactly are your plans for the property?" The question seemed to genuinely interest her, causing Tommy to reassess his assumptions about Sophia's character. "Something more aligned with my company's mission," Tommy answered. "A place where innovation is accessible to everyone, regardless of background or resources." Maxwell shook his head in disgust. "Sentimental nonsense. This estate is wasted on Father? Sophia interrupted sharply. Enough. Her intervention surprised everyone, including Maxwell, who fell silent more from shock than obedience. As tension hung in the air, Tommy noticed something familiar on a nearby table, a cobalt blue vase remarkably similar to the one he'd broken a decade ago. The sight of it crystallized the strange circular journey that had brought him back to this moment, not as a visitor seeking approval, but as the architect of a new vision. The following week, Tommy returned to the mansion, accompanied by Robert. They made their way to the basement archives, a climate-controlled room housing decades of Grant Enterprises corporate records. Maxwell kept everything, Robert explained, gesturing to the meticulously organized shelves. His father taught him to document all aspects of the business. Now those records belong to you. They began with the files dated shortly after Tommy's visit 10 years ago. Hour after hour, they sifted through meeting minutes, research notes, and project proposals until Robert suddenly paused, holding a folder marked Renewable Energy Initiative, 2015. This is it, he said gravely, spreading the contents across the table. Tommy's breath caught. Inside were photographs of his childhood project from multiple angles, alongside detailed notes attempting to reverse engineer his design. A memo on Grant Enterprises' letterhead outlined a strategy to repurpose the conceptual foundation without infringing on potential intellectual property. They knew exactly what they were doing, Robert said, his voice tight with indignation. Taking a child's idea while publicly humiliating him. Tommy examined the evidence, emotions churning beneath his composed exterior. Have the legal team review these files immediately. The next morning, Tommy requested a meeting with Maxwell and Sophia at their temporary downtown apartment. When they arrived, Maxwell's expression was guarded, Sophia's curious. I've discovered something concerning in the mansion archives. Tommy began without preamble, placing copies of the incriminating documents on the coffee table between them. Maxwell paled visibly while Sophia picked up the papers, her face registering shock as she understood their significance. You tried to steal a 7-year-old's invention, Tommy stated, his voice steady. The same day you threw me out for breaking your vase. Maxwell's shock quickly hardened into defiance. It was company property the moment you brought it into my home. Father, Sophia interjected, visibly disturbed. This is indefensible. It's also illegal, Tommy added. My attorneys confirm we have grounds for substantial legal action. Maxwell's facade cracked, fear replacing arrogance as he realized the implications for his already devastated reputation. What do you want? He asked hoarsely. Money? Public apology? I want justice, Tommy replied. But not the kind you're thinking of. He outlined his proposal. Instead of a lawsuit, Maxwell and Sophia would contribute their expertise to a mentorship program for underprivileged youth, to be housed in the renovated mansion. Additionally, Maxwell would publicly acknowledge his company's ethical lapse. You're not just asking for an apology, Maxwell said incredulously. You want me to work for you. Not for me, Tommy corrected. For the children who deserve the opportunity I almost lost because of your actions. Maxwell began to protest, but Sophia interrupted him. I'll do it, she said firmly. With or without you, Father. Her unexpected declaration hung in the air, a clear break from the pattern of following her father's lead. Tommy studied her with newfound respect, sensing a genuine desire for atonement in her steady gaze. Why? Maxwell demanded, turning to his daughter. Because, Sophia replied, looking not at her father but at Tommy. Some things are worth more than pride. Chapter 15. The Transformation. 1 year later, a crisp autumn breeze carried the sound of children's voices across the grounds of what was once Grant Mansion. Now called the Brooks Innovation Center, the property had undergone a remarkable transformation. The imposing gates that once symbolized exclusivity stood permanently open. The manicured gardens had been partially converted into community vegetable plots and outdoor classroom spaces. Inside, former ballrooms housed interactive science exhibits, while the basement laboratories, once restricted to elite researchers, buzzed with young inventors from every neighborhood in the city. Tommy, now 18 and recently accepted to State University's engineering program, stood in the grand foyer welcoming a new group of elementary school students from Central District, his old school. "Welcome to the Innovation Center," he greeted them with a warm smile. "Here, we believe that great ideas can come from anyone, anywhere." The children gazed around in wonder at the space that had been reimagined for them. Walls now covered with colorful murals depicting scientific principles, display cases showcasing inventions by previous young participants, and interactive stations where they could experiment with concepts like renewable energy, robotics, and sustainable architecture. In the center's kitchen, Sarah Brooks supervised a nutrition program she had developed, teaching children to prepare healthy meals using vegetables grown in the center's gardens. She incorporated recipes from her own days of stretching ingredients to feed Tommy on a tight budget, transformed into lessons about sustainability and resourcefulness. "Today's special guest is Miss Sophia," Sarah told the excited children as they donned small aprons. "She's going to help us prepare lunch for everyone." Sophia Grant, who had surprised everyone with her dedication to the center over the past year, entered carrying baskets of fresh produce. After breaking ties with her father, she had discovered a genuine passion for educational outreach, now serving as the center's program director. "These tomatoes came from our own garden," she explained to the children, her former haughtiness replaced by authentic engagement. "Who wants to learn how to make fresh pasta sauce?" In the main laboratory, Robert and Janet Coleman worked with older students on more advanced projects. Though both in their 80s now, they remained vital contributors, Robert guiding scientific exploration while Janet brought creativity to problem-solving approaches. By mid-afternoon, all groups gathered in what had once been Maxwell's formal dining room, now a bright communal space where students shared meals and ideas. Tommy watched with quiet satisfaction as children from diverse backgrounds animated the once sterile mansion with laughter and curiosity. As the day's program concluded, Tommy noticed a small boy lingering by one of the renewable energy displays. Something about the child's intense concentration reminded Tommy of himself: the worn but clean clothing, the scuffed shoes, the spark of intelligence in eyes too serious for someone so young. "Interested in energy systems?" Tommy asked, approaching the boy. The child nodded shyly. "I think I could make it work better if the circuit was configured differently." Tommy smiled at the familiar determination. "Show me what you're thinking." As the boy explained his idea with growing confidence, Tommy found himself completing a circle that had begun a decade earlier, with a broken vase and shattered dreams. Later, as the center quieted for the evening, Tommy walked the grounds with Sophia, their unlikely friendship having developed through shared purpose. "I heard from my father yesterday," she said quietly. "He's finally agreed to speak at next month's Ethics and Business Symposium." Tommy nodded, appreciating the significance of Maxwell's gradual, reluctant steps toward redemption. The man would likely never fully embrace the center's mission, but his acknowledgement of past wrongdoing represented its own form of transformation. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked suddenly. "Not pursuing legal action against him? Against us? You could have demanded millions in damages." Tommy considered the question as they paused by a bench overlooking the city lights below, the same view that had once made him feel small and insignificant. "What would justice measured in dollars have accomplished?" he replied finally. "This," he gestured to the vibrant center around them. "This is the justice that matters. Creating opportunity from exclusion. Building bridges where there were walls." He thought of the small boy he'd met today, and thousands like him who might never have crossed the mansion's threshold under its previous owner. "My mother always told me that possessions can be replaced," Tommy said, echoing the words he'd spoken as a child in this very place. "But character remains forever. The legacy we're building here will outlast any fortune or legal victory." As twilight deepened into evening, the lights of the Innovation Center glowed like a beacon on the hillside, no longer a monument to one man's wealth, but a testament to the power of transformation, second chances, and the enduring human capacity to turn adversity into opportunity. For Tommy Brooks, the circle was complete. The journey that began with a broken vase had led to something far more valuable than anything that could be displayed on a pedestal, a broken barrier between privilege and potential, and the promise of New beginnings for countless children who, like him, needed only an open door to change their worlds.